In March 1242, an army that had previously spread terror across the globe was observed retreating eastward across the muddy terrain of the Hungarian plains. These were the Mongols, formidable horsemen renowned for toppling mighty empires spanning from China to Persia. Only a few months prior, they had inflicted a crushing defeat upon Hungary, marking one of the most horrendous massacres in European chronicles. Vienna, then considered the heart of Western Europe, seemed within their grasp. Yet they inexplicably turned back. The perplexing question that arises is, what prompted an undefeated military, poised on the verge of conquering an entire continent, to abruptly abandon its campaign? For 8 centuries, the explanation offered has been a straightforward narrative. However, contemporary investigations, drawing on climatic data, archaeological discoveries, and military evaluations, have unveiled a much more intricate and startling reality. Feel free to share in the comments where you're tuning in from and your local time. I'm genuinely curious to know the global reach of this narrative. Because today's narrative extends beyond merely a powerful empire. It delves into how historical trajectories and the destiny of a whole continent can be dramatically altered by the convergence of forces beyond anyone's comprehensive control. To grasp the profound significance of the Mongol withdrawal, we must rewind to the year 1206. It was then that a man named Temujin achieved what was widely considered impossible. He unified all the disparate Mongol tribes under a single banner. He adopted the title Genghis Khan, signifying his role as universal ruler. From that point, he embarked on establishing the vastest contiguous land empire humanity has ever witnessed. The might of the Mongols wasn't solely rooted in their ferocity. It stemmed from an exceptionally refined military apparatus. They possessed the ability to cover 100 kilometers daily, a pace 3 times faster than contemporary European armies. Communication on the battlefield was managed through signal flags and whistling arrows. Critically, they were unparalleled masters of psychological warfare. Following Genghis Khan's death in 1227, his third son, Ögedei, ascended to power. While Ögedei lacked his father's strategic brilliance, he adeptly recognized and utilized talented individuals. Within his ranks resided the greatest military strategist in Mongol history, Subutai. Subutai was the mastermind behind the European campaign. In 1235, he presented Ögedei with an audacious proposal: invade Europe with 5 synchronized offensives. The objective wasn't merely pillage, it was outright conquest, stretching all the way to the Great Sea, the Atlantic Ocean. By 1236, roughly 150,000 Mongol cavalry had crossed the Volga River. They swept across Eastern Europe like an unstoppable storm. Volga Bulgaria crumbled, and the Russian principalities fell successively. Kiev, the esteemed capital of Kievan Rus, suffered complete destruction in 1240. Nevertheless, Subutai's primary focus remained Hungary. Why Hungary? Because it served as the critical gateway into the European heartland. There was also another factor: the Cumans. The Cumans were a nomadic people who traditionally inhabited the Russian steppes. When the Mongols launched their assault, approximately 40,000 Cumans sought refuge in Hungary. King Bela IV of Hungary granted them asylum, even adopting the title King of Cumania. For the Mongols, this act justified war. In late 1240, Batu Khan, Genghis Khan's grandson, issued an ultimatum to Bela: surrender unconditionally or face total obliteration. Bela neglected to reply. The impending storm was poised to engulf Europe. In March 1241, 3 Mongol armies penetrated Hungary from 3 distinct directions. This exemplified Subutai's classic military strategy: divide and conquer, followed by a regrouping for the decisive strike. Batu Khan and Subutai personally spearheaded the main force through the heavily fortified Veraki Pass. Within mere hours, they obliterated the army commanded by Count Denis Tomaj. A European observer likened their advance to lightning. Bela had attempted preparations, ordering the construction of formidable natural barriers along the eastern frontier. However, the Mongols deployed specialized engineering units, clearing these obstacles in just 3 days. Simultaneously, another Mongol army advanced through Poland as a strategic diversion. On April 9, 1241, near Legnica, they engaged a coalition comprising Poles, Moravians, and Knights Templar, led by Duke Henry II. The ensuing battle showcased a terrifying demonstration of Mongol tactics. They repeatedly simulated attacks and staged false retreats, enticing the European heavy cavalry to break formation. Dense black smoke was deployed to sow confusion. Once the enemy's ranks were disorganized, they were encircled and annihilated. Henry II was killed. The Mongols decapitated him, impaled his head on a spear, and paraded it through the city for weeks. They also collected the ears of their fallen adversaries, filling 9 sacks. Yet this was merely a diversion. The decisive conflict was unfolding in Hungary. On April 10th, the Hungarian army, numbering between 60,000 and 100,000 men, reached the banks of the Sajo River near the village of Mohi. They significantly outnumbered the Mongols at a ratio of 2-1. Bela IV brimmed with confidence, perhaps overly so. That night, the Mongols attempted to cross the bridge, but were repelled by Hungarian crossbowmen. Believing they had secured a victory, the Hungarians returned to their camp to celebrate, leaving only a minimal force to guard the bridge. This proved to be a fatal miscalculation. Sunrise on April 11th brought another Mongol offensive, bolstered by catapults hurling incendiary bombs, a Chinese gunpowder innovation. This, however, was merely a diversionary frontal assault. Unbeknownst to the Hungarians, Subutai had led 30,000 horsemen on a flanking maneuver to the south under the cover of darkness. They successfully located a river ford and ingeniously constructed a temporary pontoon bridge. At the break of day, Subutai materialized behind the Hungarian encampment. King Bela IV abruptly understood their predicament: encirclement. He commanded the entire army to retreat into their camp. Yet, the camp's design, overseen by Ba, was severely flawed. It was excessively cramped, with tents jammed together and wagons forming walls that impeded egress. From a vantage point on a hilltop, Batu Khan observed the scene, remarking, "They are packed together like a herd of cattle in narrow stalls, with no room to move." The Mongols commenced launching incendiary bombs into the camp, filling the air with smoke and fire. Panic seized the Hungarians. Subutai then executed his renowned tactic. He intentionally created an opening in the encirclement. Bela IV recognized this as an escape route and fled. When the Mongols made no effort to detain him, the entire Hungarian army cast aside their weapons and stampeded through the gap. This was precisely Subutai's objective. Once the Hungarians, their formations shattered, had abandoned the camp in disorder, Subutai issued the command. Mongol cavalry charged from all directions. Thomas of Split, a historian who witnessed the aftermath, recorded, "When the Mongols perceived that their adversaries were exhausted from their flight, unable to raise their arms to fight or their legs to flee, they began to rain spears upon them from all sides and cut them down with swords, sparing no one, slaughtering them like beasts. To every side they fell like leaves in winter. The entire route was strewn with their wretched remains. Blood flowed like a river. 60,000 Hungarian soldiers perished. Almost the entirety of the kingdom's nobility and military command was annihilated. King Bela IV narrowly evaded death thanks to his courageous bodyguard and Batu's directive to capture him alive. He sought refuge in Austria. However, Duke Frederick, who should have been an ally, instead imprisoned him and exacted a substantial ransom. In the ensuing months, the Mongols systematically laid waste to Hungary. They seized the royal seal from the corpse of Bela's vice-chancellor and compelled captured Hungarian scribes to forge a proclamation in the king's name, instructing the populace to remain in their homes and not fear, as the king would soon launch a counterattack. This cunning deception enabled the Mongols to traverse the countryside unimpeded, leading to the slaughter of thousands. Approximately 25% to 50% of Hungary's population, potentially 500,000 individuals, perished that year. This represented one of the most appalling humanitarian catastrophes of the Middle Ages. During the winter of 1241 to 1242, Europe was consumed by dread. Accounts of the Mohi disaster spread across the continent. Whispers circulated about the Mongols. They were barbarians, godless, and even consumed human flesh. In actuality, the Mongols were not cannibals and demonstrated tolerance towards the religions of their captives. Yet, in the 13th century European imagination, they were equated with Gog and Magog, the forces of evil prophesied to appear at the end of times in the Bible. Even their designation reflected this fear. The term Tatars or Tartars, originally applied to nomadic peoples in central Russia, came to encompass the Mongols. This association stemmed from the ancient designation of hell as Tartarus. In 1241, Holy Roman Emperor Frederick II expressed hope that the Mongols would be driven down to their Tartarus. Nevertheless, fear alone could not substitute for preparedness. European kingdoms proved incapable of cooperation. Pope Innocent IV called for a crusade against the Mongols, but insufficient support materialized. Bela IV dispatched letters pleading for assistance to the Pope, the Holy Roman Emperor, and the King of France. No serious response was forthcoming. They seemingly failed to grasp the gravity of the threat. Meanwhile, the Mongols were orchestrating their next offensive. They crossed the Danube, the final natural barrier, in the winter of 1242. Mongol scouts had infiltrated deep into Bohemia and reached Vienna itself. Batu Khan's armies poured into Austria, Dalmatia, and Moravia. In areas offering resistance, they mercilessly massacred the inhabitants. Where no resistance was encountered, they forcibly conscripted men into Mongol military service. Vienna, an affluent metropolis and a cultural hub of Europe, lay directly in their path. Beyond Vienna stretched the entirety of Western Europe, Germany, France, Italy, Spain. Nothing obstructed their advance, save for one unforeseen event. On December 11, 1241, at Karakorum, the Mongol Empire's capital, located 8,000 kilometers east of Hungary, Great Khan Ogedei embarked on a hunting expedition. That evening, he engaged in revelry with his companions. Ogedei was infamous for his excessive drinking. His brother Chagatai had even assigned an official to monitor his consumption, yet Ogedei persistently found ways to indulge. It's reported that he swore to cut down his daily cup intake, then commissioned cups twice the size. The following morning, at dawn, Ogedei passed away at just 56 years old. His death was likely caused by a stroke or organ failure due to excessive drinking, though poisoning rumors also circulated. According to the Mongol succession protocols, upon the Great Khan's death, all princes were required to return to Karakorum to participate in the Kurultai, the council tasked with selecting a successor. This was an unbreakable rule. Early in 1242, news of Ogedei's demise started to disseminate. When it reached the Mongol commanders in Hungary, they took an unexpected action. Against Subutais' counsel, they opted to retreat. This has been the conventional explanation for 800 years, and it appears logical. However, a deeper examination complicates the narrative. Firstly, the timeline is inconsistent. Ogedei died in December 1241, yet the Mongols began their withdrawal in March 1242. A messenger would require at least 3 to 4 months to travel from Karakorum to Hungary, even under optimal conditions. The historian Rashid Allen, referencing Mongol sources, noted that Batu Khan only learned of Ogedei's death after reaching Kiev, almost a quarter of the way back home. Secondly, and more significantly, Batu Khan never returned to Mongolia. He remained in southern Russia, solidifying his authority as the Golden Horde's leader. He did not attend the Kurultai. Why? Because of a deep-seated animosity with Gayuk, Ogedei's son. Batu Khan understood that journeying to Karakorum could expose him to severe political peril. Therefore, if Ogedei's death wasn't the sole catalyst, what else played a role? In 2016, a group of scientists published a pivotal study in the journal Scientific Reports. They analyzed data from tree rings. the annual growth circles within tree trunks that record climate conditions, sourced from the Austrian Alps and the Romanian Carpathians. Their findings reshaped our understanding of the Mongol withdrawal. From 1238 to 1241, Europe experienced unusually warm and dry summers. This was ideal for the Mongol army, whose cavalry relied on extensive grasslands for their horses. Dry, firm ground facilitated rapid movement. A European observer even noted the intense heat Hungarian soldiers endured at the Battle of Mohi on April 11th. However, in early 1242, the climate shifted abruptly and dramatically. Summers became cold and wet, transforming the Hungarian plains into a vast swamp. While this might seem like a minor climatic variation, for a nomadic army entirely dependent on cavalry, it was catastrophic. Firstly, the marshy terrain significantly reduced available pasture land. Each Mongol horseman required multiple horses, typically 5 to 7. An army of 40,000 men meant 200,000 to 280,000 horses, all needing daily sustenance. With grasslands submerged, horses had nothing to graze on. Secondly, the mud hampered mobility, the Mongols' greatest asset. Their light cavalry, designed for speed and agility, became cumbersome in deep mud. Rapid encirclement tactics and swift raids were no longer feasible. Thirdly, and perhaps most crucially, was the food crisis. The Mongols had ravaged Hungary for a year, killing 25 to 50% of the population and destroying most settlements. Who remained to farm? Who was left to provision a massive army? The researchers concluded that minor climatic alterations between 1241 to 42 were sufficiently extensive to change the conditions under which the Mongols initially invaded Hungary. These changes would prevent them from operating effectively as an occupying force, compelling their withdrawal. Yet even this isn't the complete account. For centuries, the narrative of the Mongol invasion has been presented from the conqueror's viewpoint. Hungary defeated, Europe helpless, saved only by Ogedai's death. However, recent investigations, particularly from Hungarian historians, have unveiled a different story, one of resistance and considerable cost. While the Mongols did achieve a decisive victory at the Battle of Mohi, the subsequent events are far more intricate. In 1241, Hungary possessed a significant vulnerability: a scarcity of stone castles. King Bela IV and his predecessors had prohibited nobles from constructing private fortifications, fearing it would lead to decentralized authority and a powerful aristocracy. Consequently, most Hungarian defenses were composed of wood, clay, and earth, unable to withstand Mongol siege engines. Nevertheless, some stone castles did exist, and it was at these sites that the Mongols encountered serious difficulties. Pliž fortress in Croatia, where King Bela IV sought refuge, successfully resisted. The Mongols besieged it, but could not capture it. Numerous other fortresses across Hungary achieved similar feats. While Mongol cavalry excelled in open battles, they struggled with prolonged siege warfare. Moreover, after Hungary's official army dissolved, a guerrilla resistance emerged. Surviving members of the royal retinue who hadn't reached Mohi in time, alongside armed peasant militias, employed guerrilla tactics to harass Mongol troops. They launched assaults on supply convoys and ambushed isolated patrols. Occasionally, they even achieved success in direct combat. Hungarian historians highlight that the collective resistance mounted by the Hungarian populace, while not extensively documented in Western records, played a far more significant role than previously acknowledged. This resistance slowed the Mongol war machine and made each Mongol advance considerably more costly. Following this, there was Vienna, a large, affluent, and well-fortified city. Despite his problematic treatment of Bela IV, Duke Frederick II of Austria proved to be a skilled military leader. He gathered his heavily armored knights and developed strategies to counter Mongol tactics. His approach was one of active defense. Rather than anticipating a Mongol siege of Vienna, he intercepted their smaller forces. In the autumn of 1241, his forces defeated Batikin's army in skirmishes along Vienna's periphery, stretching from Wiener Neustadt to the River March. While these were not definitive victories, they were sufficient to signal to Batu Khan that continued advancement would not be straightforward. Germany and the rest of Western Europe were better defended than Hungary and boasted a much larger population, which now had time to prepare. Recent archaeological findings also indicate that the Mongols sustained considerably higher casualties during the Hungarian campaign than historical accounts suggest. This was far from an easy passage. Every fortified position, every guerrilla ambush, and every engagement near Vienna contributed to the depletion of Mongol strength. Batu Khan faced a difficult choice. Either press onward into Western Europe with a depleted army, poor weather conditions, and a prepared adversary, or withdraw, consolidate his conquests, and strategize for a more robust future campaign. Then, news of Ogeday's demise reached them. So, what truly prompted the Mongols' withdrawal from Europe? The explanation isn't a single, isolated secret, but rather the convergence of multiple interconnected factors, each contributing to the outcome. Ogeday's death precipitated a political crisis, as the Mongol Empire lacked a clear line of succession. The death of any great Khan carried the risk of civil war. Batu Khan, though he did not return to Mongolia, recognized the imperative to safeguard his interests and could not remain too far from the seat of power for an extended period. Furthermore, climate change transformed Hungary from an ideal staging ground into a logistical quagmire. The Mongol army, accustomed to dry steppes, struggled to operate effectively in swampy terrain. Their horses faced starvation and supplies were scarce, rendering long-term occupation unfeasible. Military opposition in Hungary and at Vienna, coupled with the potential for a more organized Western Europe, escalated the cost of every forward movement. The Mongols were not invincible. They could achieve victories, but at what expense? And with an already weakened force, could they retain their territorial gains? There's potentially one final, often overlooked factor. The original objective might have been accomplished. Some historians contend that the primary aim of the invasion wasn't to conquer all of Europe, but to punish the Cumans and their protectors, particularly Hungary. If this hypothesis holds true, then once Hungary was thoroughly devastated, the mission was complete. Subutai, a master strategist, undoubtedly advocated for continued advancement, recognizing it as a once-in-a-millennium opportunity. However, Batu Khan and the other princes declined, not out of fear, but because they made a calculated assessment, perceiving the inherent risks and weighing the costs, ultimately determining to withdraw. This provides an important lesson about history. Significant decisions rarely stem from a singular cause. Instead, they result from a confluence of intersecting forces: political, environmental, military, and even individual psychology. In the spring of 1242, Mongol forces retreated eastward, leaving behind a ravaged Hungary. King Bela IV returned to his kingdom from a sanctuary in Croatia, to a sight that must have been heartbreaking. Ruined cities, burnt villages, abandoned fields, and a population that had been reduced by a quarter to a half. However, Bela did not capitulate. He had learned a costly lesson. Over the subsequent 30 years, he transformed Hungary into a formidable fortress. He initiated one of the most extensive castle-building programs of the Middle Ages. By the conclusion of his reign, Hungary boasted nearly 100 new stone castles, a significant increase from just 10 in 1241. He also reformed the military, prioritizing heavy cavalry and crossbowmen, weaponry that had proven effective against the Mongols. He welcomed new settlers, granting them conditional nobility in exchange for fully equipped military service. He even engaged Venice to hire at least 1,000 professional crossbowmen. These endeavors yielded results. In 1285, 44 years after the initial incursion, the Mongols returned, this time under the leadership of Nogai Khan and Talabuga. They followed the same routes as Batu and Subutai, but on this occasion they encountered a transformed Hungary. Stone castles now impeded their progress. Local inhabitants had stockpiled food in fortresses and implemented scorched earth tactics to deprive the invaders of sustenance. King Ladislaus IV avoided decisive engagements, instead employing guerrilla warfare and ambushes. Talabuga, leading the primary Mongol force in northern Hungary, encountered severe obstacles due to heavy snow in the Carpathian Mountains. His army faced crippling logistical challenges, particularly severe food shortages that resulted in thousands of deaths among his soldiers. Some historical accounts even suggest the presence of an epidemic. Ultimately, the Mongols retreated once more, this time without achieving any gains, leaving Hungary intact. For the broader European continent, the Mongol withdrawal in 1242 held profound significance. It averted a scenario where Europe might have succumbed entirely to Mongol conquest, a fate that had befallen Russia, China, and Persia. Later, European chroniclers attributed this event to divine intervention. Giovanni Diane del Carpin, a friar who visited the Mongol court in 1246, famously wrote that God had orchestrated the Great Khan's death to safeguard Latin Christendom. However, as we've explored, the reality is considerably more intricate and, in many ways, more compelling. It wasn't merely a miracle, but rather a confluence of geopolitical dynamics, climatological shifts, human resilience, and well-considered strategic decisions. So, what lessons does this historical narrative impart? Firstly, it underscores that no empire is truly invincible. The Mongol Empire, unmatched in territorial expanse throughout history, possessed inherent limitations. These restrictions weren't solely military, but extended to logistical, environmental, and political spheres. Secondly, it highlights the critical importance of preparedness and adaptation. Bela IV's campaign in 1241 ended disastrously due to Hungary's lack of readiness. Yet he learned from this failure, and 4 decades later, Hungary was prepared. The disparate outcomes of the two invasions were not products of chance, but of methodical preparation. Thirdly, it demonstrates the remarkable power of resilience. Hungary suffered immense casualties, losing between 25% and 50% of its populace. Cities lay in ruins, and the economy was shattered. Nevertheless, the nation recovered, not swiftly or effortlessly, but they did. This speaks volumes about the human spirit's enduring strength. Fourthly, it reminds us of the environment's pivotal role in shaping history. We often focus solely on human actors, kings, generals, their decisions. Yet climate, geography, and environmental conditions also wield considerable influence. A wet summer in 1242 proved as impactful on European history as any battlefield confrontation. Finally, and perhaps most crucially, history rarely offers simple explanations. For 8 centuries, a streamlined narrative persisted. The Mongols withdrew because Ögedei Khan died. A neat, memorable, and easily taught explanation. However, when we delve deeper, examining climate data, archaeological findings, and obscure sources, we uncover a far richer and more complex story. This complexity is precisely what makes history so captivating. It doesn't provide facile answers, but instead reveals the multifaceted nature of reality and how numerous forces, from climate to politics, from individuals to systemic structures, intertwine to determine the destinies of nations and continents. On a spring day in 1242, on the muddy byways of Hungary, a monumental historical opportunity slipped away. Subutai, widely recognized as the preeminent strategist in Mongol history, a commander victorious in over 60 battles, cast one final glance westward. He understood that a return was impossible. And he was correct. The Mongols would never again approach Europe so closely. Had they pressed on, had the weather patterns differed, had Ögedei lived longer, or had Bela IV been better prepared, history might have unfolded entirely differently. But that was not the course of events. And within the chasm between what transpired and what might have been, we uncover one of humanity's most fascinating historical narratives.